Welcome to Canal Build Part 2. In this part I will cover applying scatter, adding and painting the canal edge coping, adding a bramble ground covering, making a reed bed, making deciduous and coniferous trees, making bushes and saplings, adding bushes and trees, and the first water pour. Remember, it's your railway and you design and scene it as you wish. So here is the canal as I last left it, with the backfilled area of the pilings, and I'm now in the process of painting it with the good old praline, otherwise known as something else. You'll notice that it is quite difficult painting in the area because of the viaduct, the bowspring bridge, and also the loft hatch, which is directly next to this area. So I get a small amount of working space to stand in to try and reach across 4 feet of model railway scenery, but with a drop beneath me. Although there is a rail, there's very little room. As you can see, I have to squeeze in the little gap and or straddle the loft hatch itself in order to work on certain parts. So there is a head for heights needed. Now you can see that the canal has all been painted and it's ready to have the coping applied. We move on to the coping, which is 1mm MDF, which I've cut each individual piece and then stuck down, and thereafter I've primed them with Rust-Oleum MDF primer. Having seen a number of other videos, it's always recommended to prime the MDF before painting. And here is the coping, now painted with rabbit's whisker and also a light black wash, or a very thin black wash, just to give it a weathered effect. I'm going to do some more weathering, I believe, to it. Now I'm moving on to starting the scene details on the hillside. And at first it's going to be applying neat PVA, as you can see, and then I move on to adding scatter of various types, one of which is a sand and cement mortar mix from Homebase, and the others are good old Woodland Scenics, burnt grass and other greens from their fine turf range. And now, unfortunately, I forgot to video this part, so the scatter has all been applied and I've made some bramble ground cover using polyfiber that I've painted myself, and you can now see how everything ties in, and I'm pretty happy with the undergrowth of the polyfiber and how it's wrapped around the tunnel portal. I'm now going on to making a reed bed. As you saw on the side, or the right hand side of the viaduct stanchion in the middle of the canal, no narrow boats can go to the right, and therefore I felt that that would silt up a bit and reeds would flourish. So I'm making a reed bed. As you can see, I've laid down a couple of strips of masking tape, and I'm using a Gorilla Glue epoxy resin or glue, which is an expanding type of glue, and I'm applying the Woodland Scenics grass effects in, which I've cut down and gradually just added them in clumps. I'll wait for the glue to dry and then I'll cut back the masking tape, and once the glue has fully gone off, give it a light coat of paint with a brown paint, and then add it into the canal. initially I placed the reeds at the same level in the canal, but felt that was too low, and so I've increased the height by putting in a little bit of polyfiller and then painted that brown and gone from there. Next part of the video is adding static grass, and I'm using 4mm Farmer's Field, which I think has got a nice blend to it. It's a late summer type of mix, so in my opinion it works nicely in this sort of valley area which is a bit overgrown in the late summertime. And you'll see when I go on to making the trees, although the larger trees are not autumnal yet or showing their autumnal colours, some of the rowans that I've put in, or mountain ash, have got berries on. Again, you can see it's quite a difficult squeeze, and maybe I should have thought about doing the canal right at the beginning of the build as opposed to re-scening the area. Making some trees. I'm fortunate I have a beech hedge in the garden, and at this time of year it should be trimmed, and therefore I've collected a number of trimmings. As you can see, they're all equate to between 45 and 70 scale feet in 4mm scale, and I've bought some seafoam to attach. Fortunately only bought enough to do one large tree and a small test tree. So I sorted out the seafoam, as you can see, and I've applied it to the tree. This was the test tree, so it is one of the sticks, and I had a number of options basically. Firstly, I tried to stick the seafoam directly onto the trunk and it didn't work, and then I had the idea of drilling holes and making a little spike on the end of the seafoam and pushing that into the hole and then sticking them with super glue. And here you can see using the little drill to make a small hole to accept bits of seafoam, and it's a question of adding the seafoam as you feel fit. No tree is exactly the same, and therefore you can do what you wish, bearing in mind that a lot of trees, their width at the bottom of the canopy is approximately the same as the height of the tree, so it gives you that balance. Now this is quite a fiddly process, as you can tell. It needs a number of re-drills and obviously using super glue as you work down the tree. Yes, my hand did get stuck to the tree at one point, but I was able to extricate myself as opposed to having to go to work the next day looking like a tree. But after, I would say, 2 hours of work, I've managed to get a semblance of a framework of a tree that I was happy with, and I allowed it to dry overnight just to allow everything to secure, and after the 24 hours gave it a little shake to see what fell off. Nothing fell off, so I was happy and moved on to the next stage. Obviously, for health and safety, be very careful when you're using a knife to open up the holes, and also when you're using the drill. I never used the drill directly with my finger behind it. I always held the twig in between thumb and index finger and drilled in, so I knew that if the drill slipped and went through, it would actually miss my skin. And here is the finished tree, unpainted, 24 hours later after everything has dried. And that's the tree in situ with a brown aerosol spray just for the twigs, and it's just in where I'm going to be placing it. So I'm quite happy with its position. It doesn't look out of place. Trees do grow up tall, and that is the height of the viaduct. And as you can see, I'm quite happy with the way the bushes are still coming down the hillside. So now I'm applying the scatter, and I've used various colours of scatter to the tree, and as you can see I use a hairspray that my wife kindly bought for me. I don't have that much hair, so it would be odd going in to buy hairspray, but spraying it away from the work area so it didn't blow all of the scatter around. And you notice I've got a container to save the scatter where possible, because it comes in useful later on. Be aware not to over add the scatter. Do a little bit at a time, have a look at it, re-spray, and then add a little bit more. You can always add, but it's very difficult to take away. And remember how the light falls on the trees. So I used lighter colours underneath, for you might think why if the light's falling on it, but a lot of leaves, the underside of leaves, are lighter underneath than they are on top. So use the lighter scatter underneath on the undersides, and then a greener scatter on the top side, just to give it a variation on light tones. And there you can basically see the finished product ready to go into the little canal area. I've got a number of other trees that I'm going to make, but whether they go into that area or not, I don't want to overdo it. As I said, less is more. And there is the tree up in the loft, ready to be put in place. Now I move on to making, or I should say that's the residue of the scatter, and I then go on to use up the seafoam bits that broke away and were in the bottom of the box, and I use this scatter to make smaller trees and bushes, which you can see here. Again, using the hairspray technique, and as you can see, first of all I tried to dip the bush in because of the size of it, but that didn't look that good and didn't work very well. So I then just returned to the fact of hold it, spray it, and then sprinkle by hand over the bushes. Now these are random little trees like saplings and wider bushes, so they could be hawthorns, or in the case that I'm doing, just green bushes, but some are rowan trees, and I have later added red flowers, not overboard, but added red flowers to give me a look of berries on the tree, as I say, late autumn. And here you see all the little bushes and shrubs that are going to be put into the scene. Now I'm moving on to coniferous trees, or Norwegian spruce, which can grow up to 70 feet. So I've been out into the garden, and our butterfly bush, the flowers have gone over and they started going brown, and we've had a bit of dry weather, so these are ideal for picking, and in my opinion make very, very good conifers of a certain type. Obviously there are different conifers which have a more open habit, but these are fairly close knit specimens. So again, it's exactly the same, using different types of scatter. You'll see I'm using the residue scatter, but I've also will add later on, or I did add later on, another varied colour with a little bit of yellow in it, just to pick out different green tones. If you go to any woodland and walk through a woodland of mixed conifers and mixed deciduous trees, green is green, but there are lots of shades of green. So use a bit of artistic license and use as many shades as you have or that you can afford. As you know, I try and do things as cheaply as I can, but this is not a cheap hobby, so I try and do as much as I can with things from the garden, like the buddleia, which allows me to get the Woodland Scenics materials, etc. And there are the conifers ready to go up into the loft.